I wrapped up my recap of Book 1 of Fire Emblem. Here's its main story, and as a follow-up, I want to dedicate a video to Bruno. For some reason, people keep saying we don't talk about Bruno, but I'm going to talk about Bruno. In this video, I want to cover 3 topics. First, I want to rant about some Book 1 plot points. Second, I want to look at Bruno and Veronica's relationship more and ask the question, are they really full siblings? Third, I want to cover where Bruno has appeared in the main story after Book 1. First off, let's plot some timeline of events in Book 1 to help tie in my talking points. I believe the earliest event we learn about Bruno is that at some point his mother is suspected of treason, and that leads to her death in isolation. Assumingly, this also leads to Bruno being outcast from the royal family. He then leaves Emblem to live in Asker and assumes Zacharias' identity. Zacharias then befriends Alphonse and Sharena. Commander Anna tells us they were childhood friends, which means all of these events took place a long time ago. I would say possibly close to a decade, give or take a couple years before the present day. There is a large time skip from Bruno's exile, and at some point the Emblem Emperor dies. This leads to some sort of peaceful times between the two nations. However, that peace ends when Veronica begins to invade worlds herself, and we can assume this is when Alphonse, Sharena, and Zacharias join the Order of Heroes. From the events in Book 1, we learn Zacharias goes missing, and we know this is because Bruno cannot control the curse of Emblem. He returns to Emblem and has tried to find a cure. With this basic timeline of events, I want to rant about some done things in Book 1 that don't really make a ton of sense. Mainly the fact that the Asker trio cannot recognize Bruno as Zacharias. We know Bruno leaves the Order after Veronica starts invading worlds herself, and there is no way this war has been going on for that long of a time. You're telling me that Alphonse and Sharena would not recognize their childhood friend after he's been gone for maybe no more than a year or so. Considering Alphonse only discovers Bruno with the mask on at the very start of Book 1, it's possible that he literally just disappeared and reappeared in his Emblem attire. I feel like Bruno only covering his eyes is a super weak attempt, and unless he's been trying to do a different voice, then I would have to say it's just a terrible job at trying to hide his identity. Maybe if he had a vastly different hairstyle, it'd be more convincing or something. It feels like they were trying to do a masked Marth kind of thing, but that only works in Awakening because no one has actually met Lucina at that point, and she doesn't want to reveal her eyes due to the brand. Alphonse, Sharena, and Bruno have known each other for a long time, and Bruno didn't leave very long ago. Once they know his identity, the mask actually doesn't really make a ton of sense to keep anyway. They could have gone with a full mask prior to the reveal, and once that secret's out, they could show his face. Like, at this point, what purpose does the mask serve? Maybe Bruno has something to hide when he's back in Emblem, and that leads into my second topic. Are Veronica and Bruno actually full siblings? So first off, let's go over some details presented in Book 1. When Bruno is talking about the curse, he mentions the Emperor and refers to him as our father in relation to Veronica. This means Bruno and Veronica are at least related via the Emperor. What about their mother though? This one is a bit more peculiar. We learn Bruno's mom is suspected of treason and died during her punishment. We also learn Veronica is not the daughter of the current empress, but the child of the emperor and his first wife. Considering there is a second wife, you could assume the first wife is the same one who died after being accused of treason. If this is true, then Bruno and Veronica would be direct siblings of the late emperor and his first wife. Now, I could accept this, but then my next question would be, how come when Bruno got exiled, why wasn't Veronica also chased out? The main reason could be that Bruno's mother and Veronica's mother are not the same person. Perhaps Bruno's mother is a concubine of sorts, and when he was accused of treason, Bruno got dragged down with her. I think this makes sense, because if Bruno was actually Veronica's full sibling, then wouldn't he be the next heir to the throne? I think if that was the case, even if he was exiled at a young age, the royals of Asker would have recognized the name of Emblem's next heir when it was brought up. If Bruno was a lesser prince and his mother was not the first empress, then it makes sense why only he was kicked out and not Veronica. In this scenario, they would be half-siblings. Book 6, Chapter 3 has revealed some interesting information that can be useful to this discussion. In the current events, Letizia has managed to frame Veronica of treason. We learn Veronica and Bruno's father was the one who overthrew Letizia's family. Maybe not directly, but he was the one who took the throne in the end. In chapter 3, Letizia does state that she and Veronica were having a tea party the day her family got overthrown, so we can assume they already had a close relationship by that point. Maybe Letizia and her family were responsible for Bruno and his mother's accusations. We know Letizia at least harbors some ill will toward Veronica and her father, so maybe getting rid of Veronica's brother was part of their way of revenge. It could also just be a coincidence, since we know Emblem has a problem with power struggles regardless. For the most part, I do think Bruno and Veronica are actual siblings, at least half siblings. I don't think there's a major twist about the relationship in that aspect. In their playable alts, they both talk about each other very fondly, and I believe part of this year's motivations for working with Hel in book 3 is because Bruno in her world had died. I don't think it makes sense for them to be so close to each other if they didn't at least grow up together before Bruno was exiled. Coming back to the whole mask thing for Bruno, I do think it's possible he's managed to hide his return to Emblem from everyone except Veronica. He is supposed to be exiled, right? Would it make a ton of sense to welcome him back? Perhaps it is the fact that Bruno has been gone for so long that has led Veronica down her initial path of war with Asker. If it wasn't obvious, Veronica is extremely lonely. If Bruno had been around, maybe she would have grown up differently. To round out this video, I want to do a fun recap on all of Bruno's appearances in the main story, or just in the game in general. We will discuss every book except book 1 and give a brief explanation of what he's been up to. Bruno is a major player in book 1, so I suggest you watch my book 1 recap to get a better understanding before he starts to pop in and out. First off, not a huge deal, but after book 1 is finished, Bruno tells the Asker gang about a certain rite which unlocks the Sacred Seal Forge for us in game. Even though he can't be with them, Bruno is still trying to help them out. Bruno's next appearance or mention is in book 2. It happens in chapter 11 and 12 when the gang and Fjorm managed to meet Prince Harid in Muspo. Bruno, under his Zacharias alias, had given Harid information about Surtur's Rite of Flames and how to defeat him. In the final act of book 2, Veronica and an ogre are trying to escape from the castle, and Bruno actually appears in the flesh to defend them from Levatine. At the same time, the Asker and Nifl crew appear, and Alphonse thanks Bruno for his help. From Bruno's talk with Veronica, it seems implied he was also looking after Xander after Xander tried to defend Veronica from Surtur earlier. At this point, we can assume Bruno takes Veronica back home, and that's his job done for the year. Next for book 3, as far as I can tell, Bruno is completely absent. He does not appear at all, which is kind of strange considering Veronica and Emblem get dragged into the fight with Hel. That said, we did get our one and only playable version of Bruno from the Spring Banner during that year. Bruno is at the Spring Festival because Loki has told him about a clue regarding Emblem's curse. In the paralogue, Bruno finds a treatise about the toggle, and he believes it is the clue he's looking for. We don't really get much more information about it though. In the accompanying Tempest Trials event, Princess Veronica is overtaken by Emblem's curse, and Bruno teams up with Alphonse and Sharena to go and save her. Alphonse and Bruno do talk about the dragon gods of Asker and Emblem. They have another reassuring chat about working together to break the curse. Book 4 is a confusing mess, but I believe Bruno is once again not actually involved at all. He has seen multiple times, but that Bruno is basically just a nightmare. Veronica does mention that Bruno and Xander have gone on a long journey, and she hasn't seen either of them for a long time. The first real reappearance since book 2 of Bruno in the main story comes in book 5. In chapter 9, after the gang and Regan discover what went down at the Tower of Nidavellir, Bruno fights his way to them, and he's actually using his lance apparently. He has come to ask for help against Fafnir's army who is invading Emblem. Bruno realizes Emblem is not really in a position to ask her for help, but Alphonse recounts that they've worked with Veronica in book 3 and 4 while Bruno's been away. The gang follow Bruno back to Emblem, they defend against Fafnir's attack, and at this point I think that's all about Bruno and Veronica are involved in for book 5. That brings us to book 6, chapter 3, which is what has been released so far and I'm making this video. We can get a very brief scene with Bruno and Xander on another journey. They are still seeking a cure for Emblem's curse. Surely, we will see Prince Bruno / Zacharias more this year, and I'm hoping book 6 can shed more light on more details about Emblem's royal family matters. If Bruno is gonna find a cure for the curse, now seems like the time for some actual progression. We've waited a long time, and while Veronica has gotten some screen time to develop with the Asker crew, I would like to see the Asker and Emblem conflict at least move forward. Are they still sworn enemies, or is it all just about the curse? Will the gods of Asker and Emblem appear in this book? Will we finally get a play of Bruno and Veronica in their base forms? Again, with Ascended ults being a thing now, I would love for all of the Asgard and Emblem characters to get a sort of powered up new look to show off the story is moving forward. It seems like a really easy way to go about it, as we saw with Fjorm Legjorn. This has been a really fun video to make, and hopefully we get some answers this year. Up next in the Phalors series, we'll talk about Book 2. Check out the Book 1 recap if you haven't seen it, and I'll have links in place to the next video when it's ready. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.